few years back, I do not think this model was even envisaged for the Indian subcontinent. But today, it has become a reality, with several smart cities coming up across the country. Smart cities use information and communication technology to streamline urban operations on a large scale. Technological ecosystems collect traffic, air quality, noise, energy consumption, and movement data in order to make improved and sustainable decisions. In the times of coronavirus pandemic, what are we hearing about? Drones, new types of surveillance, digital twins, and real-time dashboards which are being used. This is the time when the smart cities are leveraging their smart solutions in responding to this emergency situation. So while the virus followed by the lockdown has crushed the Indian economy to an extent, the time is ripe for dream of the smart cities to come true. We at NDA have been fortunate to be associated with the 2000 Watt Smart City Association for the last 1.5 projects of creating and establishing smart cities, or as they call it, the carbon neutral cities in India, primarily the project in Pune, which was launched last year. We are glad that today Swiss Indian Chamber of Commerce have joined us for this event. And we have the Swiss Consul General, Mr. Othamar Hardegger, joining us for the keynote speech. Mr. Hardegger had joined the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs in 1981 and has served across various countries. Before we start with today's session, I'll take this opportunity to introduce our stellar panelists. We have with us today Mr. Vikram Kumar, the Metropolitan Commissioner and CEO of the Pune Metropolitan Regional Development Authority. He was earlier the CEO of Maharashtra Maritime Board. We are delighted to have you join us today for this session, sir. I will now move on to our international guests who are joining us from various parts of Europe. Firstly, we have with us Ms. Alicia Montoya, who is a multicultural communications professional who heads the Swiss Re's Research Commercialization Wing. Her love for technology and innovation has led her to head the web and even the audiovisual efforts at the European Commission's DG Enterprise and Industry. She joined Swiss Re back in 2012 and is primarily involved in developing technology, core IP, partnerships, and end-to-end offerings for sustainable economy. We also have along with us Professor Jurgen Volm, who is a partner and managing director of Dries & Söhne, a consulting agency involved in the real estate sector in Germany and Switzerland. He is also a professor at the Stuttgart University of Applied Sciences and specializes in project, construction management, stakeholder, and risk management. Joining this esteemed panel is our very own Dr. Andreas Binkert, who is the Vice President of Neusch Development and Team Leader for Overseas Projects. He has been a member of the board of the 2000 Watt sites in Switzerland ever since 2008 and has played an active role in the development of the Green City, which is Zurich's first carbon neutral city. Last but not the least, I'm obviously fortunate to welcome the founder of Nishith Desai Associates, Mr. Nishith Desai. And with that, I'm going to request Mr. Desai to say a few words and start today's session.
Thanks a lot for introducing me, and wonderful to have all our guests here. I'm really happy. I have to speak few words as Payel mentioned, so I do not want to take too much time. But I think there are two things. One, with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic, certainly the importance for sustainable cities and social distancing and other things have become very relevant. And how do you manage your life in your society in a socially distanced world? So on one hand, you are distanced physically. On the other hand, you're connected virtually, even closer than ever before. And on the other hand, I think this smart cities, I think one, to create new smart cities, other is even we'll have to repurpose some of our existing real estate portfolio if you want to really do what they are sitting on. I believe that a lot of talking about one bedroom apartment means there is a hall, there's a kitchen, and there is a bedroom. and that's all about one-bedroom home. But now when we talk one-bedroom home, that means you'll need one more room to work. And therefore, a study room would automatically be included in the definition of one bedroom. You know, so in the same way, you know, we'll have to repurpose a lot of our real estate to create differentiated value. Real estate would no longer be considered as only what you call a hard asset or a product, but I think you will have to also see how it becomes a service, because you will have to really attach more services to the real estate. And we'll have to create new business models out of the whole real estate syndrome. And the smart cities are going to set good example for, you know, working in those places, making sustainable and a lot of things with the use of IoT. For example, people may be at home, and even if you're at home, you can measure whether they are suffering with some kind of COVID pandemic. Is there something happening? One doesn't have to move out of the house. You can track everything. So that is, you know, a lot of healthcare benefits are there. Traffic management, well, of course, hopefully traffic goes down now. Automobile industry will make more ventilators and you know, other things than just about the cars. I think there will be a lot of repurposing auto industry. And one of the important things that we'll have to take care of, I don't want to talk too much at this point in time because there is a lot more coming up, and we have extremely powerful, knowledgeable, stellar panel here. And I would leave it to them to start with, and then as we go along, we'll interact more and more. But smart city development is a very exciting you know, development that's happening. And let's continue our dialogue. Over to you back, Payel, for moderation, and let's take it forward.
Thank you so much, NMD. With that, I would now request Dr. Shivprasad Laud, who is the Executive Director of Swiss Indian Chamber of Commerce, to say a few words before we begin today's session.
Thank you, Payel. On behalf of the Swiss Indian Chamber of Commerce, let me welcome you all to the 6th knowledge sharing webinar, which we have been organizing since the time the lockdown has started. And in these challenging times, it's been really the only way where we can connect now is through webinars. And I'm saying challenging times is not only because of COVID-19, but also challenging because it is indeed a challenge to sit at home and work. Before going further, I would like to welcome the Consul General of Switzerland, Mr. Othamar Hardegger, and I request him to give his keynote address. Over to you, Othamar.
Very warm welcome also from my side to all participants at this webinar. As official representative of Switzerland here in Maharashtra and Western India, I'm of course very happy to participate in this webinar. And I'd like also to give a special welcome to the distinguished representatives of the government. I'm not sure, Mr. Hitesh Vaidya, is he also present? Ministry of the Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India, and Mr. Vikram Kumar, Metropolitan Commissioner of PMRDA. First of all, thank you also to Mr. Nishith Desai and his associates for joining forces with the SICC to organize this webinar to a really highly relevant topic. And thank you so much also for giving me the time to share a few thoughts only. I will be brief. I think it's important to save time also for the real experts in this of this topic, and then for the Q&A with the participants later on. Well, sustainability has been the topic, I would say, before the Corona crisis, and it is far less prominent right now. But in my view, it still requires our full attention. Why? Many aspects are important in my opinion, and I just like to mention a few. Nothing new, but just to remind also the illustrate the impact that we have here. And first of all, I think we all agree that our world has to become more sustainable, and we have to reduce massively our carbon footprint. I like to illustrate this a little bit. Recently, a report in a reputed Swiss newspaper development. There are plenty of definitions of what the smart city really is, and I must say I like this following a very short version, which says a developed urban area that creates sustainable economic development and high quality of life by excelling in multiple key areas like economy, mobility, environment, people, living, and government. Just to show a little bit the extension what smart city can be or should mean. So what generally what benefits we could expect from a smart city? In my view, first of all, of course, is what has been mentioned by Mr. Desai just before, is an enormous gain of efficiency. I mean, efficiency because we have integrated efficient public transports, we decongest the cities, so we save energy, and of course we use much more renewable energies than we use now. And of course we will have energy efficient and smart buildings. So it will result in a cleaner air and ultimately also, of course, better quality of life. It's practically what we experience a little bit in recent weeks. Here the Mumbaikars will agree that the skies have rarely been as blue and the air as good as in the last couple of weeks. Obviously forced to the by the lockdown. So smart city means also better protection of the environment. Means we have to address, we have to address issues like also waste problem, wastewater, waste in general. Use the waste for generating new and renewable energy. And also what's very important for me when talking about smart city is the innovation factor. I think smart sustainable cities are drivers for innovation. It's an important point also that we have seen and learned also in countries like Switzerland and in Europe in general. Smart cities generate new innovation, bring new companies, new ideas, and new processes that are very important to bring forward this issue of sustainable cities and sustainable economies. Then, last but not least, I have to mention this also as a representative of the government. We need to fulfill the commitments like all UN member countries for the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And as we all know, these 17 goals have been set, and all the UN member countries have committed to this. And this should create, in fact, a healthy balance of the three dimensions of social, economic, and ecological development. That puts it all a bit what smart cities and sustainable development is all about. So what is the Swiss Connect in this whole story? Of course, we have it also in the invitation. We have seen it, the 2000 Watt Smart City Association is connected to India, is connected in particular to Pune, where they have signed a MOU last September to plan and develop a model carbon neutral smart city township in Pune metropolitan region. So this is one of the projects. There are other projects. We will hear certainly about this here in India with in other states also. So it's hopefully the start of an interesting new adventure and interesting development of the 2000 Watt Smart City Association here in India. They use a label, a 2000 Watt site label, which has been invented originally by the ETH Zurich. And the association is really also has the rights to implement it abroad. They have done it already very successfully for various sites and various townships in Switzerland. So far, 32 townships were certified and received the label 2000 Watt. Now, also important to say, talking about SDGs, 2000 Watt Smart Cities fulfills 11 of the 17 UN Sustainable Goals, and they are also able to label this for the cities that adopted this 2000 watt label. What I like very much about the project of the 2000 watt Smart City Association is also the multiplier effect. It's important, and also that's the plan to scale up this Pune project. As I said, there is a first township in which shall be implemented, but the aim is really that it can be replicated and multiplied later on. We support from, and that's why I'm also very happy that we have today in the panel Mrs. Alicia Montoya from Swiss Re as one of the company that is very nicely positioned also to help and support such projects here in India. As I said, I want to be brief, ladies and gentlemen, and I just like to say also that it's important that no country, also not Switzerland, has the right to teach any lesson on sustainability. We all know that we have to do our own homework and to fulfill the SDGs and also to become more sustainable. And I'm deeply convinced, however, that we have to share knowledge and expertise among the countries. And I think Switzerland is ready here and is very eager also to bring in expertise from Switzerland to India, that we ultimately will reach our goals with the SDGs, but also to reach our goals to promote and develop the economy, to develop the country here in India. I would say our children and grandchildren will measure us by what we have done for the environment and the sustainable development of this world. And in that sense, I hope we will go a step forward. And thank you very much for the time to address you here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hardegger. I don't think the audience could have, I think they have gained enough and more. You have set the tone for today's session. They have got the background, how the Indian and the Swiss government are coming together, what are the goals in mind, and what is the ultimate objective. With that, I'm going to directly move to Andreas over here. Andreas has been involved with this project for a very long time. As I mentioned earlier, he has been on the board of the 2000 watt site since 2008. So considering his role and involvement, the first question that I have for him today is, where do you see the urban development going in India? And why do you think in that situation, 2000 watt smart city is ideal or apt for the current Indian scenario?
Thank you very much, Payel. I will take over and run with the ball you threw. Very soon, 75% of all Indians will live in cities. The big metropoles are suffocating under commuter traffic, disjointed logistics for goods, deplorable sanitary systems, and mountains of waste. We all know that. All of our friends in India suffer from it. In the Green City Zurich project that you just saw before, we were able to develop the first carbon neutral township in Switzerland. It combines 2000 watt site, which is the most advanced sustainability level worldwide. It is the only label worldwide that looks at how much energy does a person use, not a building. Who cares about the buildings? If we have a growing population, we have a growing amount of energy needed. So we have to go according to person. The 2000 watt smart city principles are 6 of them: smart centrality, smart connectivity, smart tech centers, smart energy, smart food production, very, very important issue in India. And if all of those 5 are energy management, traffic management, and a community app where everybody who lives there can get information and speak to each other about important subjects. So, how do I see the future of urban development in India? If we do what the principles of 2000 watt smart cities require, then we have a chance. The smart grid connects central places of high density. People should live close together, as they do in India anyway. So you're a step ahead of Europe, where people don't live that closely together. These central places can be very small. That's why we're talking about townships, not about cities so much. Or they can be mid-size, and then we call them towns, or they can be large, and then we call them city. So a city well connected with the surrounding towns and townships, all built according to sustainable building standards, is what we call a 2000-watt smart city. I'll show you how this is built with the primary node, the good connections, the secondary node, the towns around the big city, and then the tertiary node, the small townships around the towns. And all together in the smart grid becomes the 2000-watt city. And keep in mind, we start with the building to be well insulated, to be well aired, naturally ventilated, whatever is possible in the climate. We put them together to townships, and several townships together form a town, and several towns the city. And in this grid, which we call 2000-watt smart city grid, we have a chance, and we can become sustainable in the near future. And more of the technology of that, I would like to hand over to the next speaker, to Jurgen Volm. Professor Jurgen Volm works with us on the 2000-watt smart cities in Switzerland.
Thank you, Andreas. I think we have understood the context and how it's going to be useful from the Indian perspective. But with that, as you rightly said, since we have an international urban expert with us today, it becomes even more relevant to understand why do we even need such kind of sustainable cities, and whether the COVID-19 situation will change the planning demands when it comes to such smart cities in India. A very warm welcome to you, Professor Volm.
Hello, welcome, Payel. So getting back to your question with respect to whether we need smart, sustainable cities in India, we can expand this question to a global perspective, whether we need sustainable cities at all. So with respect to the developments regarding COVID-19 that we've all faced over the past weeks and months, unfortunately, has shown how vulnerable our world has become. So the globalization, as we all know, has led to strong interlinkage between the continents. However, this small virus showed that it did not respect our borders or any of these interlinkages. And so the more we are connected, the faster this dissemination happened. And on the other hand, we need this connectivity to share our resources in a smart way. And these are more or less the 4 big M, the manpower, money, materials, or also machinery, to seize these synergies between the different continents and between different people on this planet. However, with our responsibility for future generations, also the sustainable use of our natural resources, as we have heard, and also the protection of our environment, we need to apply smart solutions on the places we live. And that means to our townships and to the cities, as Andreas illustrated. These smart, sustainable cities are a way for India to overcome these several future challenges we've heard. So 75% of Indians will live in cities, and we cannot escape globalization. However, we need to think about, in a way, deglobalization. Let me name it that way. What does this mean? We cannot step back and hide away in our silos and in isolation. However, we in the past weeks, and we identified this again, and this decreases also the level of vulnerability and increases the level of certainty for all of us. So therefore, consider, for instance, Switzerland. We do not have mega cities here in Switzerland, so the whole population is between 7 and 8 million. So this is more or less the size of a mega city. However, our largest city in Switzerland is 420,000 citizens. It's Zurich. And we have, on the other hand, a high level of diverse usages available in all these towns, townships, with a highly efficient infrastructure that enables us to share these resources efficiently. So with respect to the planning demands, we already heard a lot about the future development of residential Also the future development of our working environment, how will the office market develop over the next years. We will probably identify a trend towards decentralized solutions with a higher level of self-support. So therefore, the question is, how will our offices become places where we collaborate and communicate rather than work on desks? So we can work on the desks at home if we have enough space and if our residential homes are built to enable us to work from home, or we go to co-working environments where we can really share the infrastructure with others, and the office, and this is also true for me as an employer, will only be the place where we collaborate and communicate and cooperate. So co-working will definitely increase, and also tremendous change in retail will happen. We've seen the increase in e-commerce and online trade, and so the question is, what will our shopping malls look like in the next years? And maybe it's more about user experience rather than going there and buying some items and issues.
Thank you, Professor Volm. I think we have set the stage that smart cities are here to stay. 2000-watt smart cities need to be established in our country, and though there's a long way to go, but I think this is the juncture where we need the Indian government supporting that as well. And with that, I would welcome Mr. Vikram Kumar, and thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. Considering Pune is one of the cities which has been chosen to have a smart city, especially a 2000-watt smart city, I wanted to know from you, what are PMRDA's plans when it comes to urban development, and why do you think Pune was specifically chosen to have a smart city?
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to start with see where India stands in terms of smart cities. See, India, a population of around 130 million, 45% of India living in urban areas, which is around 600 million people living in urban areas. The real efforts towards smart city in India started with the Prime Minister's mission on smart cities. When Prime Minister came forward and said, let's build 100 smart cities in the country. That's where the real focused effort towards smart cities started. Now, last few years, there have been massive spending by the state governments, by the federal government, by the central governments on infrastructure. Metros, roads, ports, lot of activity, lot of development happening by both the federal government and the central government, and huge spending happening on infrastructure. The idea is very simple. The idea is to improve the standards of living and trying to bring on board the best available practices which are available in the world. Be it in terms of solid waste management, be in terms of the health management, be in terms of the public transport. The best available in the world should also come to India, should also be used by Indians. But the problem or the challenge which we are facing is that the smart city has to be designed in Indian milieu. What works for Zurich may not work for Pune. What works for Switzerland may not work for Maharashtra. Indian societal needs are very different, and we need to work according to Indian needs. The design has to be as per the requirement of the local society, local taste, and local flavors. For example, just to quote, Mumbai's population is 15 to 20 million people. If you look at MMR, it's 20 million people living in Mumbai itself. Huge population of our country is in need of apartments which are not very big in size. A lot of low-cost housing, lot of housing which requires probably very small footprints of apartment is required. And accordingly, the designers have to adjust to this population percentage, which requires very low-cost housing, very low-cost requirements they have. Since last 2 months, we have been facing this COVID pandemic, and I think the COVID pandemic has given the requisite nudge to development of smart cities. The nudge, the push has come from this COVID pandemic. We have felt the need to live in sustainable cities. We have felt the need to live in such cities which are fully taking care of our needs without going outside our city. Such cities are required, such cities' needs have been felt over last 2 months. Smart city needs to become more smarter. When I say smarter, I see it should not only cater to people who are working in IT sector or in financial sector or who work with IT or computers. We also need industrial smart cities. We also need cities in which there are industries, but there is a housing which is nearby. There is a place where people can work, which is not only IT. Somebody told me that there is not even a single automobile in the world in which there is nothing from Pune. Each and every automobile manufacturing in the world has something to do with Pune. Pune is a mix of population which is young, which is vibrant, which is working in IT sector, which is working in manufacturing sector, and Pune is expanding at a very, very fast rate. When we did a survey, we realized that around 80,000 apartments will be required every year in Pune for next 20 years. So much is the flow of people towards Pune. It is acting like a magnet for the hinterland. The hinterland of Maharashtra, people are moving towards Pune, and because there are jobs available, because there are opportunities available, people are shifting to Pune. And in PMRDA, we are working towards making this possible. We are working towards providing them transport solutions in terms of metro. We are developing metro Pune. We are also looking at developing the ring road in Pune, which will encircle the Pune city so that people can easily move around Pune. Then also we are looking at the water needs of Pune's population, where we are developing a lot of water schemes for the Pune city from nearby areas which are having plenty rainfall. So basically the idea of PMRDA is to provide the requisite infrastructure, the infrastructure required for the cities to prosper, infrastructure required for people to come and live in Pune. For 2000 watt cities, we have already shortlisted few sites. Andreas and we are working together. In spite of this lockdown, we have been in constant touch. We have been doing our VCs, and we have shortlisted few sites. These sites, as Andreas thinks and as we think, are ideal site for these 2000 watt smart cities. These sites are near major industrial and IT hubs. These sites, once we are able to break ground, we'll see huge interest in terms of people's participation, in terms of people's demand. I'm pretty hopeful that as soon as the lockdown ends, we'll be able to secure the land and work towards this development of these cities. Overall, Pune as the whole is facing a lot of in-migration. Pune as a whole is a preferred choice for many industries. Post this pandemic, we feel many more industries will come to India, many more manufacturing opportunities will come to India, and amongst those coming to India, a maximum part will come to India because it already has an ecosystem, it already has a very strong base, and we are ready for such exciting times in future. Thank you, Payel.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar. I think the tone is set that we have the technology coming in from Switzerland. We have the requisite infrastructure which is being provided by the Indian government and the necessary support, and the fact that both parties recognize the need for having smart cities in India. With that, I would like to slightly digress because we now know about the technology, we know about the governmental support, but there is a very important component which is going to play a crucial role when it comes to the smart cities being developed in India. With that, I will now request Ms. Montoya, who is there on the panel with us today, to share her thoughts.
The fact that smart cities is not just about efficient cities, it's about livable cities and sustainable cities. And this is the focus of many reinsurers like Swiss Re, who need to think of development in the long term. So for companies like Swiss Re, the impact of our investments and the risks that we take can have a big impact on developed and developing economies looking to do better in terms of building resilient economies and societies. So that's very much the focus for Swiss Re. And I can see we're a little bit short of time, so I'm going to go quickly. We all know why we're focusing on cities. Most of the world population will be living in cities or is already today, and that trend towards urbanization is only going to grow, with 60% of GDP coming in the world's largest cities, and 60% of megacities being in Asia and many in India. So this is a very hot topic for India, and I know you have hundreds. Enhancing and investing in infrastructure is critical to enable growth. And that goes beyond construction and engineering. We also invest in things like energy, renewable energy production, transportation, marine, aviation, logistics, trade enablement. All of these are critical growth enablers for economies. And of course, as the urban population continues to grow, the building stock is expected to double by 2060. Now, this is the equivalent of building a new New York every month from now until then. So, and the energy consumption will double by 2040. The middle class will double from 1 billion to 2 billion in the next 10 years. These are very dramatic changes. And how do we do this sustainably? How do we make sure that we're meeting growing stakeholder expecting all the risks, which of course also connect physically because the space is dense? This creates a very big accumulation potential, which we can help solve. So we're working in public-private research partnerships in order to accelerate developments and understand risks better so as to predict and prevent them and manage them as best as possible. And of course, we also work hard on understanding and developing resilient solutions that will give a competitive advantage to cities and nations so that they can attract investments and businesses and citizens. So there's a challenge out there as to which city is smartest and is attracting the best companies, the coolest people. So this is very important because this also has a huge impact on the cost of borrowing capital and the availability of capital for investments, for example, into infrastructure. So if you go into the next slide, one of the areas that we focus very much on is, of course, event resilient infrastructure, because natural catastrophes are growing, and the what we call the protection gap is actually growing as well. And for example, in India, up to 66% of public sector extreme weather event losses recently have been related to infrastructure damage. So building resilient infrastructure in cities is critical in order for governments and economies not to keep being set back at each event, which one of those perils that just keeps hitting you. We like to call it a death by 1,000 cuts. It's where you keep hemorrhaging resources and losing economic value because of one loss after another. So it may not be as dramatic as one earthquake that just devastates your city, but you get 100 of them, and so you're constantly being lagging economically due to it. So understanding these risks, and then if you go to the next slide, building infrastructure that is future-proof and can accommodate for the changing environment is critical in order for governments and private companies to credibly and reliably invest in some of these big projects. And of course, one of the big risks that is arising and is already affecting India is higher temperatures. So heat waves in cities are having huge impacts. For example, also in construction, where projects have to stop because it's simply too hot. And so all of this is creating new risks that we need to better prepare for and manage. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can already see that there have been recent headlines showing the impact of climate change on Indian infrastructure. And I was very happy to read that in June 2016, India signed the Sendai Disaster Risk Reduction Framework with a clear commitment to build back better, right? So it's not just about, you know, rebuilding after a disaster. It's really about trying to build infrastructure that will withstand cyclones of the scale of Fani and Orissa. We go to the next slide. So what we are doing at Swiss Re, we have an initiative called Quantum Cities. And what we try to do is we try to understand risks and their interconnectivity. And we use technology in order to better model and quantify risks and then predict and prevent risks. And then what we do is, if you go to the next slide, we look at how this translates into solutions for the different parts that are critical to our economies, to our societies, and that are resilient with respect to the environment. If we go to the next slide, it's not all solved. So there are a number of research pillars within Quantum Cities that we're working on, because there are many different questions that we still need to solve. So, and you know, we're not going to go from no technology to full technology. We're in a constant transition. And so that transition between a digital society where machine intelligence and humans work together also creates new risks. So for example, on the roads, when you have different levels of autonomous vehicles, and so you have people driving, deciding what the car is going to do against people driving where the car is deciding, and who's liable, and how do we make those algorithms work better. So these are the kind of areas that we're working on. Or for example, for supply chain, how can we use sensors and machine learning in order to better predict and prepare for risks, but also respond to risks. So for example, also in pandemics, you know, once you have a pandemic, how can we better redirect resources? How can we better respond to these very highly connected and high impact risks? And so, of course, we're also doing that in the area of health, and the big topic for us remains climate change and natural catastrophes. So if we go to the next slide, what we're working on as a company is to really develop risk solutions to this. And really, we at Swiss Re measure the smartness of a city and its ability to deliver safe, healthy, sustainable lives and economies. And we use technology to better understand risks and behaviors, just to develop solutions that can support our company's purpose to make the world more resilient. So if you go to the last slide, we're working at the nexus of technology, economy, and societal changes that are creating new risks, but also bringing new opportunities. And we need to better understand those risks, and we need to work together in public, private, and often also research partnerships in order to bring the solutions to these large-scale transformational projects that support urban and national strategic visions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Montoya. I had a few questions, and I can see a lot of questions being piled up already. But considering we are running short of time and there are several questions which I already had in mind I wanted to pose, I'm going to go directly to the urban expert over here, Professor Volm. Professor Volm, after understanding this, I think there's something else where the concept of having a smart satellite economic town. Can you explain us how it has become a success story in various parts of the world, and which stakeholders like other urban developers itself need to consider it for a successful implementation, especially when it comes to India?
Thanks, Payel. It's a good question. Smart satellite cities or towns, they're an important instrument for developing polycentral urban regions. So you can see some quite good examples here in mainland Europe, and I would say whole Europe is kind of a smart satellite town. That history showed that these monofunctional satellite towns, where you only have one specific usage, for instance, commercial functions or residential areas or highly industrialized areas, are quite under threat, and they are really likely to fail because they're not resilient to market and societal changes, especially in crisis situations, as we have faced over the past weeks now, heavily.
Thank you, Professor Volm. With that, actually, I'm going to go back to Andreas, actually. Andreas, I'm going to club two questions, actually, for you, and I ask you at this stage about explaining the projects which you have in India. And in light of that, I'm also going to take up one of the questions which have been posed by the audience about the fact whether this 2000 watt smart city talks about whether it deals with redevelopment of inner cities as well as old core areas of the cities with dilapidated and dense fabric. If you could club both your questions and answer over here. Andreas, I think you're on mute. That's the reason we can't hear you.
I'd like to answer the question first. Yes, in Switzerland, what we mostly do is we try to repair the existing cities. So the 2000 watt smart city idea is not only a greenfield project, but it's also a brownfield project. The difference of brownfield projects is by far bigger than in greenfield, because in a greenfield we can start baggage from the past. So what we do in Switzerland is small steps in existing cities. What we're trying in India is, on the contrary, actually a green field development. In order to become a successful 2000 watt smart township, you don't only want to build buildings. You need to have a vibrant life in these towns. How do you get that? Now, the residents must have ample work, otherwise they commute to the next town. Children must find good schools, otherwise they have to be bused to the next town. The community must function well, otherwise it's dead and boring. And the community must get good care and comfort. And all of that has not much to do with density or building or construction or concrete, but it's a prerequisite. Now, I have talked about the vibrant life, but the vibrant life needs to gel. So what we came up with is a model township. We take 1 square kilometer of land on which we build a township which is carbon neutral for 20,000 people. But we don't start with the construction of buildings. We start with planting trees. We need trees for fresh air, for food, because it takes time. And only at the end do we really build the township. And one of the questions I've seen on Q&A is, how much does that cost? Well, it's not like buying a banana. You can ask easily, how much does it cost? In Switzerland, about 100 times of what it costs in India. Well, in towns, it's a little bit like that too. India is less expensive. We had our calculation people look after that very carefully. And we believe that a square kilometer of town of FAR2, that means you can build twice the amount of space as you have land, will cost something like 200 million for its infrastructure. And if sold in pieces and parcels, in blocks, between roads and avenues, you can, and the life cycle costs, they are even less expensive than the usual sprawl. Imagine the following. In Indian setup, several ones of the more affluent states are ready for 2000 watt smart cities, where you can see people drive around in BMWs or Mercedes limousine. You are in the perfect setup with a high potential. These people drive a BMW, Mercedes. They want sustainable comfort in their cars, in their homes, and in their cities. And it's not a question of the money is not here. The money is here because the market is here. So that brings me to Pune is one of these places that have a very strong market. And if you look at the next slide, you can see we have been offered by Vikram Kumar and his crew 16 sites around Pune, around the ring road. And we were able to select 3 of them, 2 of them in prime time, third one a little bit later. And these 3 areas represent exactly what Vikram has told us earlier. It's IT country, it's manufacturing country, and the third one is medical city country. These places will become drivers for a lot of economy, for a lot of workplaces, a lot of schools, a lot of fun in life.
Actually, go back. I have a question for Mr. Kumar over here because you have ended on a very interesting note as to how the amount of land which we have already got from the PMRDA. With that, I actually want to ask Mr. Vikram Kumar that what is PMRDA's support going to be? Is it going to be up only with respect to the land, or what extra support can the government provide? And what expectations do we have?
Smart cities. This set of new rules again will have to be framed and approved by PMRDA. Third, we have to take a lot of government approvals also, like environment approvals, etc. That also will come to PMRDA for approval or not. But most importantly, we, along with 2000 Smart Cities Society, will work together in designing, in development, in marketing, and making these cities run in future. We already have signed a memorandum with them, memorandum of understanding, according to which we have shared our responsibilities, and we are working for that. Your second question was regarding partnership with certain industry.
Fundamental to driving investments. So insurance can be a powerful tool in stimulating sufficient risk transfer solutions and investment in critical infrastructures. And in Asia, much of the investment comes from the private sector, public sector. So, so bringing in other stakeholders to help share that risk and share that investment is critical for us to plug the infrastructure investment gap, because nobody alone, not private or public, can carry these risks on their own. And so reinsurance industries combine risk knowledge, the data, global data, and risk transfer solutions can help drive the sustainable insurance solutions that are fundamental for infrastructure investment. And if you go to the next slide, so for us, what's really important is 2 things. One is bringing together the right stakeholders. So that's very important. And what we want to do, so
which brings me back to Dr. Andreas. I think the most important question for today's evening session. In your view, what do you think is the future plan for 2000 Watt Smart City Association in India? And why do you think this is the right time when investors need to come and invest in these kind of particular projects?
First, I have to say that there are very few 2000 watt smart cities on our globe. One of them is called Switzerland. Switzerland, all of it, is one smart city. So all of what you see is a little bit bigger than Pune, but not much. So all of Switzerland, anything between Geneva on one west and St. Gallen on the east end, all of that is one smart city. Towns and townships are small and easy to control. They're well connected and easy to reach. They offer work, they offer schools, they offer hospitals. A lot of good life, just as I mentioned before, has to be done. And they are decentralized, which makes them more resilient. They are also, in a way, deglobalized. Switzerland is not even a member of the European Union, but that makes it less vulnerable. Corona lockdown teaches that we must think in small units to create, for Prime Minister Modi's vision of 100 smart cities, combined with a healthy, safe, and sustainable lifestyle. So I am absolutely certain connected to be controllable and to make a life that will also be enjoyable for our children and their children. That can be done with the 2000 watt smart city. Over.
Thank you so much, Andreas. I think we'll take an additional view as well from the urban expert, Professor Volm. Why do you think this is the right time for investment? And I think there have been questions coming in that why should private entrepreneurs even invest in smart city projects?
Yeah, thanks for this question. So many and a lot of true things have been said this evening. So India is a fast developing country, and we've heard it that there's a tremendous need for residential buildings, etc., etc. And we also need to take care about the environment, about energy consumption, about a healthy environment. This is all true. And this is all true when we talk about smart cities. And we had this discussion for a few years now. And for me, the exciting question is what makes a smart city really smart at the end of the day? Is it the connectivity? Is it digitization? Is it infrastructure? Is it all the sustainable aspects that we have? And one thing we have not tackled today, and there I see a great chance for India and for the young people in India as well, is about business models. So with all these smart city development goes along the development of new business models. The way we did business over the past years will change tremendously when we implement these smart cities with all the digital solutions as well and all our interconnectivity. We heard about risk mitigation, and this is also a first step into business models. However, smart solutions and the developments in the IT sector will lead to new business models, new ways of contracting, new ways of creating revenues. And there I see a great opportunity. And although we act in small townships that are heavily interconnected and where we have a deglobalization and smaller handleable units in place, we also need to think about scalable business models. Yeah.
From a private perspective.
Yes. So I think the biggest thing the government ease of doing business in the country. We are trying to reduce the number of processes. We are trying to reduce the number of days it takes for approvals. We are trying to make things more efficient and more quicker. For example, if a approval was given 45, now it takes just 30 days to give approval. And such big projects when it comes to our country, when it comes to Pune, all the more important that we hold their hands. All the more work together with them in partnership and make sure that any hurdles which are being faced by the investor or developer is taken care of and is cleared immediately. We have made it single window system in which all approvals of the requirements, requisites, etc. will be taken care of by only PMRD. PMRD is one body which is responsible solely for the project.
So before I move to Miss Alicia again, I had a quick question for Andreas based on the question. There's an interesting aspect which has been asked. How can the cluster development idea and smart city project together work in tandem? If you could throw some light on that.
Example. In this last slide I showed you, you saw Switzerland and the connectivity. In this next slide, you see a system which I told the Chief Minister was a system of high vulnerability. And I think Alicia will agree with me. If we build a highway between Nagpur and Mumbai and say along the highway, we will build a whole row of smart cities, then that is a great idea. That's wonderful. But to do all of that on one highway is like a pearl on one string. If the string breaks, the pearls get lost. So what we need to do, we need to make the system more resilient. And the grid is the most resilient system we know. It's like the World Wide Web. It works because if one connectivity breaks, another one will take over. And that is exactly the idea of the 2000 watt smart grid. So what you see here is basically all of Maharashtra connected with good connectivity. And connectivity doesn't only mean highways. It also means connectivity of energy, connectivity of goods, and connectivity of information. All of that together will create a smart town or a smart city or a smart state of Maharashtra. Over to you, Payel.
Thank you so much, Andreas. I know we are already way past the time. It's past 7:30, but I'm going to request and take a 5-minute extension since we
for the next few years. So this is a huge ambition. Now, if you go to the next slide, infrastructure investment has two big challenges. One is the actual funding gap, which is enormous. The second one is building resilient infrastructure, right? Because, and we need to do both at the same time. So if you go to the next slide, some of the risks around investing in infrastructure are around political and regulatory. So and some of these are growing. And all of these risks are, as usual, interconnected. So as cities grow, that happen all the time in big installations, and there are financial risks. And so if you go to the next slide, I think reinsurers play a critical role in two ways. One is as risk takers. So we de-risk investments, we lower access and cost of capital. And we also provide the critical advisory to improve regulatory mechanisms that enable big, long-standing infrastructure investments. And we do this, for example, for construction projects from cradle to cradle. We're really looking at the full lifetime of a project and trying to de-risk it all the way along. The second role that we play in the next slide is as long-term investors. And here there's many things that we can do in order to help plug the infrastructure financing gap. So we need to all work together in order to build a healthy pipeline of well-prepared and bankable projects. We need to establish a tradable infrastructure asset class. We need to bring better performance and risk management to the construction industry. And we need to build robust cross-border investment standards so as to provide the right mechanisms and foundations for all of these stakeholders to come together and contribute to this very large and growing infrastructure gap. Thank you.
Which brings me to my next question as to why should smart energy be felt necessary actually by the planners and investors for benefits of better town planning?
Is this if we want to keep the goals of 1.5% climate change at the max? It is not necessary if we don't care, and maybe in a couple generations there are no more human beings on Earth. The Earth will keep turning, not a problem. But for us, it is a problem. If we want to survive, and if our grandchildren want to survive, then we have to go to clean energy. Our townships use 100% clean energy. There's no gas, no coal, no oil. That's what we have to do around the globe, not only in India. We've proven it in 32 townships in Switzerland. It's possible, even though it's very cold here in winter. In India, we don't have that problem. We have the problem of heat, and we can tackle it. Back it over.
Thank you so much, Andreas. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Desai, and I would want him to give a few words and summarize today's discussion, which has been extremely informative, insightful, and actually the note on which I started itself is a very innovative subject, which is of relevance in today's times. With that, I would now request Mr. Desai to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Payel and Andreas and everyone on the panel. Very interesting, detailed discussion. I think lots of questions we could address today to take this whole smart city project more feasible?
Thank you so much, NMD. With that, I will actually like to thank all our panelists today for joining our session. And I'm sure the audience has understood the concept of smart cities if they were not aware of it in the past and the benefits associated with it. And there are a few questions which we couldn't take up, but I can tell the audience we will compile all of them, discuss with the panelists, and get back with our responses.